Elena Hart arrived at Fort Marin under a gray dawn, her duffel bag slung over one shoulder and her expression carved from stone. Most recruits fanned out across the parade ground in groups, laughing, stretching, exchanging the bravado of eager young soldiers. But Elena walked alone, each step measured, like she was calculating the distance between herself and the world. Nothing about her seemed ordinary. Her posture, the subtle sway of her hips, even the faint scuff of her boots against the pavement was precise, almost intentional. She checked in silently at the recruitment office, where the clerk eyed her with the polite curiosity reserved for recruits who seemed too calm for someone entering basic training. But Elena didn't look at anyone. Her gaze was focused forward, and even the whisper of her name from the clerk barely registered in her consciousness. She was here for a reason, one she hadn't fully admitted even to herself yet. The barracks smelled of disinfectant and fear. Fresh paint and pine wood filled the air, a scent that would soon be replaced by sweat, gunpowder, and exhaustion. She claimed her bunk silently, placing her bag neatly underneath. While others unpacked, chattered, and claimed territory, she stood back, folding her uniform with surgical precision. Even her hands moved with an efficiency that made the other recruits pause mid-motion and stare. A whisper floated. "Who is she?" Elena didn't care. She had a past no one here could touch, and a skill set no one could yet understand. She had trained in shadows, in places that didn't exist on any map, under instructors who demanded perfection, and punished failure with a coldness that burned into memory. She had learned things that would make most of these recruits flinch, yet she carried them with the kind of casual calm that made it appear as if she were just another girl trying to fit in. The first day of field drills was uneventful for most recruits. They struggled with the standard-issue M16s, misaligned scopes, and fumbling hand signals. But when it came to the long-range rifles, Elena's fingers danced over the weapon like she'd been born with them there. When the instructors called for zeroing the scopes, she stepped forward without hesitation, adjusting the bolt, cleaning the barrel, and aligning the sights with a methodical rhythm that seemed almost ritualistic. Every other recruit's movements were clumsy, uncertain. Elena's were flawless. From the corner of the room, Instructor Collins noticed her. He had seen many soldiers pass through Fort Marin, some talented, others reckless. But there was something about the way she handled the sniper rifle that stopped him cold. It wasn't just skill, it was instinct. She performed a subtle adjustment on the barrel twist that very few were ever taught, a technique Collins immediately recognized. He froze mid-step, realizing the gravity of what he was witnessing. Only black-file operators, soldiers trained in secret operations that didn't officially exist, used that technique. The elite, the untouchables, the ones whose existence wasn't acknowledged even in classified files. And here she was, a fresh-faced recruit, performing a move that could only have been learned under their guidance. Collins narrowed his eyes. He didn't approach. Not yet. He needed to be sure. But the moment Elena's gaze flicked up and met his across the room, he knew. He had trained some of these operatives himself, and only a handful of soldiers had ever performed this maneuver without a shadow of hesitation. Elena's calm masked a storm within her. She could feel the weight of his stare but refused to react. She had been taught to anticipate, to remain invisible until the right moment. And yet, instinctively, she knew Collins wasn't just curious. He recognized the signature of her training. She had made a mistake, or maybe she had been too confident. Collins approached, slow and deliberate, each step echoing in the room filled with the faint scent of gun oil. The other recruits sensed the shift in the air. They didn't understand what was happening, but they could feel the tension rise. Whispers died as he reached her side. "Hart," he said, his voice low, measured, yet edged with a warning. "Who taught you that technique?" Elena froze, her hands still on the rifle, heart thudding in a way she hadn't expected. She had come here to hide, to blend in, not to reveal the depth of her history. Her fingers itched to tighten on the rifle, to perform another flawless adjustment, but she resisted. She couldn't let him see too much. Not yet. "Sir, she started, but her voice faltered. Any answer she gave would be a lie. She couldn't tell him about the black file program she'd been pulled into at 16, the secret missions overseas, the nights spent in compounds that weren't on any map, training under instructors who demanded loyalty beyond logic. She couldn't tell him about the bodies she had cleaned up, the lives she had taken, or the shadows she had become. Collins leaned closer, eyes scanning her with a predator's focus. "Don't lie to me, Hart," he whispered, just loud enough for her to hear. "I know the signature of that training. There's no way you could have learned it here. Who taught you?" Her chest tightened. She swallowed hard, searching for a truth that would be both safe and believable, but no such truth existed. Her life had been forged in secrecy, and admitting it now would make her a target. And the truth wasn't just dangerous for her, it could put others at risk. She said nothing. Collins straightened, his jaw tight. "We're going to talk after drills, alone." The words were simple, but the weight behind them made her stomach churn. He wasn't just asking, he was ordering, and he knew what he was ordering her into. Alina returned to her rifle, finishing the cleaning with meticulous care, her mind racing. She couldn't hide her skills, not now, not when Collins had already seen. And she knew instinctively that today's observation wasn't just curiosity, it was a test. And tests at Fort Marin were never just about skill. She glanced around the room. The other recruits avoided her gaze, sensing that she carried something they could not understand. Whispers floated again. "She's different." Different, dangerous, untouchable. She had been called all three, depending on who was watching. But none of those labels captured the reality. She was trained to survive, and survival often meant being alone. As the sun climbed higher, the training exercises commenced. Alina moved through the drills with fluid efficiency, her eyes scanning every corner, her hands adjusting each weapon as if it were an extension of her body. She felt Collins' gaze follow her, silent and heavy, like a shadow she could not shake. Every movement was scrutinized, every breath catalogued. And then, when the last drill ended, Collins approached again. This time there were no words, just a single nod toward the exit. Alina followed him to a quiet hallway, away from the watchful eyes of her peers. Her pulse quickened. The air in the corridor felt different, charged, electric, like the calm before a storm. Collins stopped and faced her. His eyes, usually sharp and disciplined, softened slightly, but they still held that unyielding weight of authority. "Alina," he said slowly, "you need to tell me the truth, not about who trained you, but why you're here. What I saw, it doesn't belong in a recruit." Her hands trembled ever so slightly, not from fear, but from the memory of everything she had endured to get here. She thought of the abandoned compounds, the silent missions in foreign lands, the nights spent under gunmetal skis, learning skills that were supposed to be forgotten. Skills no one alive had the right to teach her, or to know she retained. But she also knew something else. Collins wasn't just an instructor. He was someone who had seen shadows before, someone who might recognize the life she had tried to bury. And in that recognition lay danger, or salvation. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Words would not serve her, not yet. From somewhere in the distance, a sudden clang echoed. A dropped weapon, a bell, a signal. Alina stiffened. Her senses, honed by years in shadows, told her something had shifted. The room, the barracks, even the world outside seemed to hold its breath. Collins noticed too. He glanced down the hallway, then back at her, his expression unreadable. "Not here," he said quietly. "We'll continue later." Alina nodded, but as she returned to her bunk, she could feel the weight of observation pressing down on her. She had been spotted, recognized for what she truly was, and for the first time in years, she felt the thrill of danger stir in her chest. And in the distance, beyond the walls of Fort Marin, she felt the world beginning to shift in a way that promised nothing would ever be the same again. Because once Collins had seen her technique, the quiet recruit was no longer invisible. And someone or something was already moving to find her. The hallway smelled of disinfectant and tension, a cold, sterile reminder that Fort Marin didn't tolerate weakness. Alina followed Collins in silence, her boots barely making a sound on the concrete. Her pulse was steady, but every fiber of her body was on alert. Every shadow seemed alive, every echo suspicious. Collins walked slightly ahead, his hand brushing near the sidearm at his hip. Not that Alina doubted he'd ever need to draw it to intimidate her. "Talk to me," Collins said finally, breaking the silence. His voice was low, controlled, but it carried a weight that made Alina's stomach tighten. "Where did you learn that technique? Who trained you to move like that?" She hesitated. The words wouldn't come. Every memory she had spent years trying to bury, the compounds, the missions, the instructors who treated her like more than human, rose like a tide in her mind. To speak the truth would be to expose herself to an unimaginable risk. The program that raised her had no mercy for loose ends, and even one hint that she was still alive could make her a target. I studied on my own," she said finally, keeping her tone neutral. It was a lie, but it was the only one that would keep her alive. Collins didn't flinch. "Don't lie to me," he said, and his eyes locked onto hers with a predator's intensity. "I know what I saw. I've trained enough operatives to recognize that signature. Only black file operators know that move." Alina's stomach dropped. The term hit her like a punch. The black file program, agents so secret that their missions didn't exist, their names were erased from every record. People who could disappear without leaving a trace. People she had survived training under and sometimes against. She didn't answer. Collins crouched slightly to be eye-to-eye with her. "If what I saw is true, if you really were trained under that program, you're in more danger here than anywhere else. Do you understand that?" She swallowed hard. The truth was obvious, he already knew. She couldn't hide her past from someone who had spent decades in special operations. "Yes, sir," she murmured. "Good," Collins said, though his voice was tight. "Because you're not alone anymore. Whatever brought you here, it won't just leave you in peace. Not for long." Alina's mind raced. She had come to Fort Marin for a reason, to disappear, to hide among the recruits. She thought she could blend in, keep a low profile, and train without drawing attention. But Collins had already recognized her for what she was, and the black file operators she thought she had escaped would know she had surfaced. She didn't flinch. Survival had always been about control, and she intended to control this situation. Collins motioned for her to follow him into an empty training room, the door clicking shut behind them. The air inside felt heavier, charged with expectation. He gestured for her to sit at a table, and she complied, nodding every detail: the arrangement of chairs, the placement of weapons on racks, the small window near the ceiling letting in pale light. Every second could be an opportunity, or a trap. "I need you to be honest with me," Collins said, leaning forward, hands on the table. "If what I saw is true, someone trained you to be lethal. Someone who doesn't care who you are or who stands in your way. Am I right?" Alina's throat went dry. She hesitated, then nodded subtly. "Yes, sir," she admitted. Her voice was quiet, but the words were weighted with unspoken history. Collins let the silence linger, his eyes studying her, searching for cracks, for lies. Then he asked the question that made her heart stop. "Why are you here, Alina? Why enroll in a base that could expose you to people who want you dead?" She wanted to answer honestly. She wanted to tell him that she had no choice, that the walls of her past were closing in, that hiding here was the only way to survive long enough to plan her next move. But words could betray her. And Collins was dangerous in his own way, someone who could offer protection or inadvertently deliver her to her enemies. "I needed to start over," she said instead, keeping her voice even. "I wanted to be normal. I wanted to train with soldiers, not ghosts." Collins frowned, his jaw tight. He didn't seem convinced, but he didn't press further. That worried her more. He knew enough to be dangerous, but he didn't yet know everything, and that gap could mean life or death. The moment of tension was broken by the distant blare of alarms, sharp and sudden. The shrill sound cut through the silence like a gunshot. Alina stiffened, her senses instantly heightening. Collins cursed under his breath, moving toward the door. "Stay here," he ordered, but Alina didn't move. She recognized the pattern immediately. These weren't standard base alarms. The timing, the tone, it was precise, deliberate, tactical. Someone had breached the perimeter, and it wasn't an accident. Collins returned his attention to her, voice low but urgent. "Hart, they're here for you." Her chest tightened. She had spent years thinking she had escaped, that she was invisible, that her past couldn't reach her. But she had underestimated one thing: black file operators don't forget. They don't forgive. And they always finish what they start. "Who?" she asked quietly, almost to herself. Collins shook his head. "I don't know yet, but you need to move, now." Alina's mind raced. She had trained for situations like this: ambushes, capture attempts, extraction operations. But she had never been caught off guard in her own hiding place. Not like this. Not in the presence of someone who had just recognized her for what she truly was. She followed Collins down a narrow hallway, her eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. She felt the weight of history in her chest. The training, the missions, the nights she had spent hiding from the world that tried to use her like a weapon. And she realized that the quiet life she had imagined here was gone. Collins led her to a small, reinforced security office. He keyed in the access code with practiced efficiency. The hum of the lock was the only sound until the door slid open, revealing monitors displaying the base perimeter. "Alina," Collins said, motioning toward the screens, "look at this." On the monitors, figures moved with calculated precision along the outer fence. They were dressed in tactical black, moving in perfect synchronization. Every step was deliberate, every motion controlled. They weren't just intruders, they were hunters. Alina's stomach turned cold. The movements were familiar, too familiar. She had seen that precision before in training exercises she had thought she would never forget. The same silent coordination, the same unrelenting efficiency. Black file. They were here. Collins' eyes met hers, sharp and unreadable. "They're after you, Hart, and when they find you, they won't stop." Her pulse quickened, but she forced herself to remain calm. Fear was a tool for her enemies. Control was hers. She moved closer to the monitors, studying the patterns, calculating their approach. Every instinct she had honed over years of clandestine operations screamed at her to act, to plan, to survive. The room grew tense as the alarms continued to wail. Collins was silent, but Alina could feel the weight of his gaze on her back. He had seen enough to know that she was no ordinary recruit, and that whatever training she had undergone was not just dangerous, it was lethal. For the first time in weeks, Alina allowed herself a flicker of fear. Not for her life, she had trained to survive death, but for what would happen if she failed to anticipate their moves. If she underestimated them, the consequences would be catastrophic. She glanced at Collins. "I'm ready," she said quietly. Collins' eyes narrowed. "No, you're not ready, not yet, but we don't have a choice." The monitors flickered, and the sound of distant gunfire echoed faintly through the walls. The shadows of the approaching intruders stretched across the base perimeter, growing closer with each heartbeat. Alina's heart raced, but she forced herself to breathe slowly, methodically. Every muscle tensed, every sense heightened. She knew this wasn't just a test of skill, it was a test of survival. And for the first time, she understood that being recognized for her abilities meant she could no longer hide. She was a target, and targets either adapt or die. Collins keyed a radio. "All units lockdown, intruders on the perimeter. Repeat, intruders on the perimeter. Lockdown protocol Alpha." Alina's fingers flexed instinctively, readying herself for what was to come. She had survived worse. She had trained for worse. And yet, the sight of those figures moving with silent precision filled her with a sense of urgency she hadn't felt in years. Collins turned to her, his voice low. "This is only the beginning, And whatever comes next, it's going to be nothing like what you've faced before. Alina's jaw tightened. She had faced ghosts before, real ones, the kind that moved silently in the night, the kind that left no trace. But this was different. These were hunters, and they were closing in. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Then let them come," she said, her voice calm but filled with a steel-hard determination. "They won't take me without a fight." Colin studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Good, you'll need every skill you have, and then some." The alarms blared again, louder now. The monitors showed movement, figures crossing the outer fence, shadows merging with darkness, closing in. Alina's pulse pounded. Her training, her instincts, every moment of her past life surged within her. She was no longer a recruit. She was a survivor, and soon she would be a fighter. Because someone had found her. And they weren't leaving without a fight. The alarms blared like sirens of war, echoing through Fort Marin with a shrill insistence that made every recruit freeze mid-step. Alina's senses kicked in instantly. This was no ordinary base alarm. The timing, the cadence, it was too deliberate, too precise. Someone was inside the perimeter, and they weren't amateurs. Instructor Collins cursed under his breath, pivoting sharply toward the nearest door. "Heart with me, move," he shouted, grabbing her arm with firm authority. But Alina didn't need guidance. She moved instinctively, her eyes scanning the hallways, noting every cover point, every possible escape route. Her years in black-file training had taught her one thing above all: always anticipate. Always assume the enemy knows your every move before you make it. And right now, the enemy did. The corridor was long and narrow, fluorescent lights flickering overhead. Alina's boots made no sound on the concrete floor, though the tension seemed to echo from her chest like a drumbeat. Collins followed, eyes scanning every shadow, his hand hovering near his weapon. "They know you're here," he said, his voice low, clipped. "They've been watching you for a long time. Whoever they are, they don't make mistakes." Alina's stomach clenched, not with fear but recognition. She had seen this precision before, hunters who moved like phantoms, silent but deadly. Shadows trained to eliminate without leaving a trace. "Who are they?" she asked quietly, her voice steady, though her mind raced. Collins shook his head. "I don't know, but you've been marked, Hart, and we're about to find out why." The first sign of movement came from the monitors Collins had checked earlier. Small, deliberate silhouettes skirting the outer fence, advancing with synchronized precision, almost predatory in nature. These weren't base intruders. These weren't rogue mercenaries. These were trained hunters, possibly black-file operatives themselves. Alina's pulse quickened. Her fingers flexed unconsciously at her sides. "They're ghosts," she whispered. "Trained like me. Silent, efficient, lethal. And they won't stop until they find me." Collins glanced at her, his brow furrowed. "You recognize them?" She shook her head. "Not exactly, but their movement patterns, I've seen them before. Only elite operators move like this. They're after something inside me, probably the very skills I survived to keep hidden." As they rounded the corner, the faint sound of footsteps echoed from deeper within the hall. Alina's instincts screamed at her. They're inside the base. Collins stopped abruptly, pressing her against the wall. From the darkness ahead, two figures emerged, moving with synchronized precision, their faces obscured by black masks. One wielded a combat knife, the other a silenced pistol. Their movements were fluid, calculated. Alina felt a flash of recognition. The combat posture, the way their eyes scanned the environment, it was textbook black-file. They weren't just intruders, they were hunters trained for her elimination. Collins drew his weapon, but Alina raised a hand. "Not yet," she said. "Let me handle this." His eyes widened, but he trusted her. He had already seen what she was capable of. The two masked figures closed the distance, unaware that Alina had already assessed their stance, their center of gravity, the trajectory of their next move. She shifted her weight subtly, lowering her center, preparing to counter. The first operative lunged with a knife. Alina sidestepped effortlessly, letting him stumble past her. She grabbed his arm, twisting it in a joint lock maneuver she hadn't taught anyone outside the program, and slammed him into the wall. The impact rattled his body, but he was still conscious, still dangerous. The second operative raised his pistol. Alina ducked, rolling across the floor and kicking the barrel of his weapon out of his hand. It skidded across the hall. Collins advanced, covering her flank, firing 2 precise warning shots to force the intruder back. Alina's mind raced. They were fast, trained, coordinated, but not prepared for her. Not trained for her improvisation, her instinctive fluidity. Every movement, every decision came from years of conditioning that she had survived. She moved like water, flowing around attacks, striking with precision. But more were coming. From the monitors, Collins had seen shadows moving in the distance, at least half a dozen more operatives advancing through the inner corridors. The base had become a hunting ground, and she was the prey. "Alina," Collins said, urgency in his voice, "we need to move, now." She nodded, assessing the nearest exit, a side door leading to the motor pool. It was risky, but it offered a clear path outside, and from there, mobility and cover. They sprinted down the corridor, the sounds of their pursuers echoing behind them. Glass shattered in the distance, something heavy thrown or perhaps another operative cutting through a window. Alina's stomach tightened. This wasn't just a raid, it was a targeted extraction. As they reached the motor pool, Alina's eyes scanned the vehicles. Armored Humvees lined the perimeter, their engines silent but ready. She spotted one with a clear path to the gate. "There," she shouted. "That one." Collins nodded and opened the passenger door. Alina jumped in, vaulting over the seats with the kind of athleticism that drew an involuntary gasp from one of the nearby recruits who had followed behind them. Collins started the engine, and the vehicle rumbled to life, the low growl echoing in the cavernous motor pool. But just as they were about to move, a shadow dropped from the rafters above, landing on the hood with predatory grace. Alina froze for a fraction of a second, enough to recognize him. Wraith, her former trainer, the man whose reputation haunted the edges of special operations history. He was supposed to be a legend, someone feared, someone untouchable. And now he was here, standing between her and escape, eyes fixed on her with a terrifying calm. Collins reacted instinctively, reaching for his weapon, but Alina grabbed his wrist. "Don't," she whispered, sensing the danger wasn't just in the man's presence but in what he represented. Wraith's smile was faint, almost respectful. "Alina," he said, voice low, measured, "it's time to come home." Her stomach dropped. Memories of cold, windowless rooms, relentless training and missions that should have killed her came flooding back. "I'm not yours," she said, her voice steady despite the surge of fear. He tilted his head, eyes narrowing. "You were made to be mine," he said softly. His hand rested casually on the hood of the Humvee, but the tension radiating from him was lethal. Collins squared his shoulders. "Step back," he said, voice firm. "Now." Wraith didn't move. Instead, he looked at Alina, a mixture of pride and ownership in his gaze. "I'm talking to my student," he said, as though Collins were invisible. The operatives outside were closing in. Every second counted. Alina realized then that stepping into this confrontation wasn't just about survival, it was about choice. And the choice wasn't simple. Before she could respond, the lights flickered, and the corridor outside plunged into darkness. Every shadow seemed to stretch, to twist, and the sound of approaching footsteps grew louder, faster. Someone or something was moving in the dark, closer than they should have been. Alina's breath caught. She could feel the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders, the years of training, the missions, the survival instincts, all colliding in a single moment. And then from the darkness, a hand clamped over her mouth. Not Wraith, not Collins, someone faster, smaller, more agile. They were inside the base now, And the hunt had truly begun. The hand over Alina's mouth was firm, unyielding, yet practiced, an expert grip designed to control, not to harm. Her mind raced, calculating angles, weight distribution, and escape possibilities. She could feel Collins moving behind her, but the darkness and sudden chaos slowed his reaction. Whoever had her was fast, too fast. Then, through the flickering lights and shadows, she recognized the silhouette that had slipped silently into the corridor. Commander Wraith, her former trainer, the man whose name alone could unsettle elite operatives, the ghost of her past, the figure who had forged her in the crucible of black-file training. Wraith's eyes, cold and assessing, met hers through the dim lighting. No words were needed. The recognition was instant, mutual, and terrifying. Collins, sensing the history between them, moved to confront him, drawing his weapon with precise authority. "Step aside," he barked. "This ends now." But Wraith didn't flinch. His stance was calm, controlled, predatory even. "I'm not here to fight him," Alina realized. His gaze never left her. "He's in the way," she thought, tension building in her chest. Her captor, Wraith's operative, slipped away as silently as they had arrived. Alina twisted free of the hand, stepping back instinctively. The familiar weight of adrenaline surged through her veins, the rush she hadn't felt in years. Every instinct, every reflex she had honed in secret training, screamed at her to run, to fight, to survive. Wraith stepped forward, slow and deliberate, as if measuring the exact moment to strike or to speak. His voice was low, almost gentle, yet it carried an authority that made Alina's blood run cold. "Alina," he said, "it's time to come home." Her stomach tightened. Memories of frozen nights, cold cement floors, grueling drills, and missions where failure meant death surged through her mind. "I'm not yours," she said, keeping her tone steady. "You were made to be mine," he replied calmly, almost mournfully, as if the statement were a fact of nature, not a choice. His hand rested lightly on the hood of the Humvee, the slightest motion enough to exude control, dominance. Collins reacted instinctively, placing himself between them. "Step back, now." Wraith ignored him, eyes locked on Alina. "I'm talking to my student," he said, as if Collins didn't exist. Alina's heart pounded. She had been trained to obey, to survive, to anticipate every move. But the presence of Wraith disrupted her calculations. Every memory of missions past, every moment of survival and escape, collided in a chaotic storm in her mind. Then the alarm screamed again, louder, more urgent, the base shuddering under the reality of the breach. Shadows moved at the edge of the motor pool. Operatives trained, precise, silent, were closing in. Wraith's gaze flicked toward the approaching threat. "They're faster than I expected," he murmured. Alina's blood ran cold. She had survived countless operatives, countless hunters, but the weight of Wraith's presence meant she wasn't just fighting anyone. She was confronting a man who had shaped her, a man who could anticipate every move before she made it. Collins, weapon at the ready, glanced at her. "We need to move, now." Alina didn't respond immediately. Her instincts told her that rushing blindly would be fatal. Every shadow, every angle, every pattern of movement needed to be accounted for. And her former instructor had taught her that hesitation in battle could mean death, but so could panic. Wraith's lips curved into a slight smile, almost imperceptible. "You've improved," he said. "Faster, stronger, but still predictable." Alina's jaw tightened. She had spent years escaping him, evading his control, and now he stood in her path again, calm and lethal. She couldn't afford to hesitate, not with Collins beside her and the operatives advancing. Suddenly, from the shadows, a figure dropped silently onto the hood of the Humvee. Alina froze for a fraction of a second before recognizing another of Wraith's elite operatives. Collins fired a warning shot, but the figure was already moving, agile and precise, landing in a crouch that displayed both strength and skill. "They're everywhere," Alina whispered, voice tense. She could feel the encroaching danger, the inevitability of confrontation. Wraith's eyes scanned the perimeter. "They're here for you, Alina," he said softly, almost like a confession. "They've always been hunting you." Her stomach sank. She had thought herself safe, hidden, forgotten. But the reality was brutal. Survival had always been temporary, a fleeting illusion. And now the hunters had found her. Collins moved to cover her, firing with precision at the operatives closing in. Alina's mind raced, calculating distance, trajectories, escape routes. She had trained for this moment in countless drills, in environments that didn't exist on any map under instructors who demanded perfection. But the intensity of real combat, with Wraith and his operatives surrounding her, was different, far more dangerous. One operative lunged, knife glinting in the dim light. Alina sidestepped, twisting instinctively, flipping him over her shoulder with a move she had learned years ago but never hoped to use. He hit the concrete with a sickening thud. Collins covered her flank, shooting at another operative trying to flank them from the shadows. The chaos intensified, each second a blur of motion, each heartbeat a countdown to potential death. Wraith watched her, calm as ever, evaluating every movement. "You're ready," he murmured almost to himself. "You always were." Alina's blood ran cold. "Ready for what?" she whispered, even though she already knew. Ready to fight not just for survival, but against the ghosts of her past, against a man who had molded her into something deadly, against the very organization that had trained her to be lethal. The operatives advanced again, synchronized and silent. They were fast, precise, coordinated, but not prepared for her, not for the combination of instinct, experience, and sheer will she had cultivated in the shadows. Alina moved, a fluid, rapid sequence of strikes, disarms, and tactical maneuvers that left two operatives incapacitated before they even realized she had attacked. Collins covered her, firing in short, controlled bursts, his experience complementing her unorthodox, instinctive movements. Wraith's gaze remained fixed on her, measuring, calculating. "You've grown," he said quietly, "but you're still holding back." She didn't answer. She had no intention of returning to the life he offered, no matter the training, no matter the history, no matter the skill he had instilled in her. She had escaped once. She would not return. Then the far side of the motor pool erupted in chaos. A loud crash, the sound of metal against concrete, and the shadow of a large vehicle barreling through the perimeter fence. More operatives poured in, coordinated, trained, ready to kill. Alina's pulse surged. She had seen the precision, the threat, the inevitability. And yet, in the center of that storm stood Wraith, calm, almost eerily unshaken. She realized then the brutal truth. Surviving this night would require more than skill. It would require making a choice. To flee or to fight. Collins glanced at her, urgency etched in his face. "We can't hold them off long, we have to move." Alina's eyes flicked to Wraith. For a fraction of a second she considered the possibility of returning, of letting him guide her through the chaos. But the thought was fleeting, replaced by a surge of defiance. "I'm not coming back," she said, voice steady despite the adrenaline, the fear, and the danger. Wraith's eyes softened almost imperceptibly. Pride, regret, ownership, all mixed in a way that made her stomach twist. "Then survive," he said simply. And in that moment, Alina Hart realized something terrifying. The night was far from over, the breach was only the beginning, and the ghosts she had thought she escaped were closing in, faster and more lethal than she had ever imagined. As the first operative lunged at her again, she struck, spinning, flipping, disarming, and incapacitating him with the cold efficiency that had once made her a weapon. But she could see them multiplying, like shadows materializing from the dark. Her chest heaved, every nerve alive, every thought focused on one immutable truth. She was no longer just a recruit. She was the hunted. And the hunt had only just begun. The roar of the Humvee engine filled the cavernous motor pool, echoing off the concrete walls as Alina vaulted over the seats and slammed the door shut. Collins was already behind the wheel, hands steady on the controls despite the chaos surrounding them. The shadows of Wraith's operatives were closing in, fluid and precise, moving with the unrelenting efficiency of trained hunters. Alina gripped the edge of the seat, scanning the perimeter. Every instinct screamed at her. Anticipate, adapt, survive. Years of clandestine training surged through her in a torrent, each calculation a step closer to survival. Collins glanced at her, voice clipped. Ready. Alina nodded. Just get us out of here. The Humvee lurched forward, tires squealing against the concrete as they barreled toward the open gate. Shadows skittered across the walls, operatives diving into cover, weapons raised, precise movements betraying countless hours of preparation. But Alina had anticipated this. She leaned forward, scanning the shadows, predicting their trajectories, nodding their synchronization. A fluid kick to the side mirror sent one operative sprawling, disarming him before he could react. Another lunged at the rear of the vehicle, and she grabbed a tactical tool from her belt, a compact stun device, and sent a jolt through him, sending him sprawling into the dust. Collins' hands were steady, weaving the Humvee through the barriers with the precision of a seasoned driver. Alina's heart raced, but she felt a strange sense of exhilaration. The thrill of the hunt, the raw pulse of danger, it was intoxicating, familiar. She had been trained to survive situations like this, and now every skill she had honed was being tested in real time. Wraith's voice crackled faintly through the shadows, though she couldn't tell if it was a warning or a statement. You're fast, Alina, but not fast enough. Her chest tightened. She had escaped him once. Could she do it again? The gate loomed ahead, a metal barrier against the night. Collins swerved sharply, sending a cloud of dust as the Humvee skidded around the corner. Operatives leapt from the shadows, but Alina's reflexes were faster. She pivoted, using her body weight to strike one operative in the chest, sending him crashing into the wall. Another raised a pistol, and she rolled beneath the open door, grabbing a loose pipe from the ground and swinging it with precision that shattered the weapon in his hands. The Humvee burst through the gate, tires grinding against the asphalt as it accelerated into the night. The perimeter fence blurred behind them, a line between the chaos they had left behind and the uncertain freedom ahead. Alina leaned back, taking a moment to assess their situation. They'll follow, she said, voice tight. They never give up. Whoever trained them, they're relentless. Collins nodded, eyes scanning the dark horizon. We need a route that keeps us unpredictable. They know the base better than we do. Alina's mind raced, mapping out escape routes, alternative paths, and potential ambush points. Years of clandestine operations had taught her one thing above all: predictability was death. Every step, every movement had to be calculated. The first signs of pursuit appeared almost immediately, silhouettes darting through the shadows, vehicles moving in parallel with uncanny precision. Operatives were closing in, coordinated, lethal, and determined. Alina's pulse surged. Her hands flexed instinctively, ready for combat if necessary. Collins maneuvered the Humvee through tight alleys, down service roads, and over rough terrain. Every turn, every acceleration, every swerve was calculated, but the operatives matched them step for step. A sudden explosion rocked the road ahead, a flash of fire lighting up the night. Alina instinctively ducked as debris rained down, and Collins swerved to avoid the wreckage. The operatives had anticipated their path. They were waiting, always waiting, for her to make a mistake. Alina's mind raced. They weren't just after her, they were testing her, probing her limits, pushing her toward a critical error. She could feel the familiar edge of fear, tempered by years of training, sharpening her focus instead of weakening her resolve. Collins, she said, voice firm, we need to split, divide their attention. I can handle one route, you take another. We regroup later. He shook his head. Not an option, we stick together. She knew he was right. Alone, her chances were slim. Together, they had a better chance of surviving. But even so, the tension was palpable. Every shadow could conceal an operative, every curve in the road could be a trap. The Humvee barreled down a narrow canyon road, headlights cutting through the darkness. Alina's eyes darted constantly, scanning for threats, analyzing every movement in the shadows. Then she spotted a glint of metal, a sniper positioned on a ridge overlooking the road. Her stomach tightened. "Sniper," she whispered. "High ground, 500 meters." Collins adjusted the vehicle's path subtly, keeping it under cover as much as possible. Alina grabbed her compact rifle from the back, quickly scanning the target with practiced precision. She calculated wind, distance, angle, every factor that could determine life or death. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The shot was clean, precise, and the sniper went down before the next could fire. But there were more, always more. The operatives were relentless. They adapted, changed tactics, coordinated attacks with lethal precision. Alina ducked, rolled, and struck, every movement a combination of instinct and training. Collins fired, maneuvered, and communicated, forming a deadly partnership that neither side could predict. Through the chaos, Alina's mind flicked to Wraith. He had trained her to survive situations like this, to anticipate threats, to calculate every move. And now she realized she had evolved beyond his control. She was no longer just a student. She was her own weapon. The road ahead twisted sharply, descending into a narrow gorge. Alina noticed a rickety bridge spanning a chasm, its structure weak and dangerous. "Bridge," she shouted. "Prepare to take it slow, every movement counts." Collins nodded, slowing the Humvee to a crawl. Alina's eyes scanned the gorge below, calculating the angle, the weight distribution, the potential for collapse. The first vehicle in pursuit reached the bridge, its weight causing the planks to creak ominously. Alina held her breath, heart pounding, every sense heightened. Then a sharp crack echoed through the gorge. The first vehicle's front wheels broke through the planks, plunging the driver into the darkness below. Screams echoed faintly as the second vehicle swerved to avoid the collapse, giving Collins and Alina the critical advantage they needed. They raced across the bridge, adrenaline surging, knowing that the hunters weren't finished. Behind them, the remaining operatives regrouped, adapting, relentless. Alina glanced at Collins, voice firm. "We can't stop. Not yet. We need cover, a place to regroup." He nodded. "There's an abandoned compound a few clicks from here. Could be our best shot." The Humvee roared down the canyon road, the night stretching endlessly before them. The chase was far from over. Every shadow could conceal an operative, every turn could be a trap. Yet, for the first time in years, Alina felt a flicker of exhilaration, a dangerous, intoxicating certainty that she was alive, that she could survive, that she could fight back. And then, in the distance, a figure appeared, standing calmly on the cliff overlooking the gorge. Wraith. His silhouette was dark, imposing, watching, waiting. Alina's pulse surged. He wasn't just observing, he was judging, calculating, waiting for the moment she might falter. Collins gripped the wheel tighter, eyes fixed on the winding road. Alina's hands tightened on her rifle, body coiled like a spring. The road ahead was uncertain, the danger relentless, but one thing was clear: the hunt wasn't over. And Wraith was still in control of the game she had thought she had left behind. Alina exhaled slowly, suppressing the mix of fear and exhilaration. She had escaped the first wave, but the real test, the one that would determine her survival, her freedom, and the fate of those who hunted her, was only beginning. The Humvee raced into the night, shadows stretching, operatives regrouping, and Wraith's eyes following every movement. The game had changed. And Alina Hart was no longer just running. She was ready to fight. The abandoned compound appeared like a mirage in the moonlight, tucked behind overgrown weeds and crumbling walls. The Humvee skidded to a halt on the cracked asphalt, tires grinding against debris. Alina vaulted out first, rifle in hand, eyes scanning every shadow, every corner, every possible approach. Her instincts screamed at her: anticipate, fortify, survive. Collins followed, heavy boots crunching over broken glass. "We can't stay here long," he warned. "They'll track us, they never give up." Alina didn't respond immediately. Her mind raced, mapping the layout of the compound in seconds: broken fences, derelict buildings, rusted vehicles, and elevated positions for overwatch. Every vantage point could be a threat or an advantage. Every broken window could hide an intruder or provide a line of sight for her defense. She moved quickly, her hands precise, pulling tactical gear from the Humvee. Collins watched her, impressed despite himself. There was something about her calm under pressure, the way she evaluated danger and opportunity simultaneously, that set her apart. "Barricade the entrances," she instructed, voice firm. "Check the rooftops. Set traps along the perimeter. We need layers, defense in depth. They won't just rush in. They'll test every weakness." Collins nodded, already moving to follow her orders. Alina's heart raced, but her mind was calm, focused. She had trained for situations like this countless times: training simulations, live fire exercises, survival drills. But this was different. Real danger, real operatives, real stakes. From the distance, a faint rustle of movement reached her ears. Alina froze, rifle raised, eyes narrowing. Shadows moved beyond the perimeter, figures advancing silently, coordinated. "They're here," she whispered. Collins exhaled sharply. They didn't waste time. Alina moved to a high vantage point, climbing the broken stairs of what used to be a watchtower. The wind whistled through the broken structure, carrying with it the scent of dust, decay, and imminent violence. She scanned the compound below, noting the approach vectors of the operatives. They were precise, methodical, moving in squads, testing the boundaries, probing for weaknesses. Wraith's silhouette appeared on the ridge overlooking the compound, unmistakable in his calm observation. Alina's pulse tightened. He wasn't just watching. He was calculating, evaluating, judging every move she made. Her fingers tightened on her rifle. She didn't just have to survive these operatives. She had to prove she could survive in a way that even Wraith could not control. She glanced at Collins. "Set the traps, I'll cover the approaches. We slow them down, we force them to make mistakes." Collins nodded. "Understood, be careful, these aren't ordinary soldiers." Alina didn't respond. Her eyes were fixed on the shadows, on the operatives closing in, their movements synchronized, efficient, and lethal. They weren't just intruders, they were hunters, and she was the prey. The first operative approached the north entrance, stepping lightly over debris. Alina exhaled slowly, finger steady on the trigger. She waited, calculating the exact moment to act. When he reached the threshold, she struck. A precise shot rang out, hitting the operative's shoulder. He dropped, rolling back into cover, silent except for the soft thud. She pivoted immediately, scanning for the next threat. The operatives adapted instantly, moving in two directions simultaneously: north and east approaches, flanking positions, calculated diversions. Alina's mind raced, adjusting calculations, shifting positions, marking targets. Every second was a battle of instinct versus anticipation. Collins activated one of the traps, an old, rusted chain that had been rigged to collapse part of a doorway. The first squad stumbled, their momentum disrupted. Alina took advantage, striking two more operatives before they could regroup. Wraith's voice echoed faintly across the ridge. "You've improved," he said, calm, controlled. "But you're predictable, always a little predictable." Alina's chest tightened. She knew he was right. Every move she had made, every tactical choice had been effective, but not perfect. He was observing, learning, waiting. The remaining operatives regrouped, moving faster, more aggressively, coordinating their attack like a single organism. They were relentless, pushing forward with a cold efficiency that left no room for error. Alina adjusted her position, ducking behind a crumbling wall. Her rifle scanned the perimeter. She spotted the lead operative signaling the others, gesturing, coordinating, anticipating her responses. "They're organized," she muttered under her breath, "like they've trained for this exact scenario." Collins fired a suppressive shot, forcing the lead operative to dive for cover. Elena used the distraction to move, taking a better vantage point. She dropped to the ground, rolling behind a rusted vehicle, then pivoted, taking two operatives down before they could react. Wraith's silhouette moved along the ridge, observing, calculating, silent but omnipresent. His calmness unnerved her, yet it also fueled her determination. She couldn't just survive, she had to outthink him, outmaneuver him, prove that she was no longer just his student. From the east side of the compound, a sudden flash caught her attention. Operatives had deployed a smoke grenade, obscuring their movements. Elena's pulse quickened. Smoke reduced visibility, disrupted lines of sight, and forced mistakes, but it also forced her to rely entirely on instinct. She inhaled, feeling the adrenaline surge through her veins. This was what she had trained for, what she had survived countless times in exercises and real missions. Every skill, every memory, every ounce of instinct mattered now. Collins moved to reinforce the east side, taking cover behind an abandoned wall. Elena pivoted, adjusting her position to account for the reduced visibility. The operatives were closing in, moving faster, more aggressively. Their coordination was flawless, almost mechanical. She struck first, rolling out of cover and taking down one operative before he could reach her. Another lunged from the smoke, knife in hand. Elena sidestepped, disarming him and sending him sprawling. Her movements were fluid, precise, lethal. But the smoke concealed more. More operatives, more danger. And Wraith's calm presence reminded her that the real threat wasn't just the hunters. It was the one who had trained her, the one who could predict her every move. She moved again, rolling behind a rusted vehicle, then springing to the rooftop of a crumbling building. From this vantage point, she could see the remaining operatives moving toward the north entrance, their synchronization flawless, almost robotic. Elena's heart pounded, but her mind was calm. She calculated distance, trajectory, and timing. She waited, then struck with precision, incapacitating two more operatives before they could react. The smoke cleared, revealing the extent of the breach. The compound was littered with incapacitated operatives, but more were advancing, relentless, adapting, testing every weakness. Wraith's silhouette shifted along the ridge, observing, unshaken, unhurried. His presence was a constant reminder. The fight wasn't just against the operatives. It was against the ghost of her past, the man who had forged her into a weapon. Elena exhaled slowly, scanning the horizon. The compound was her battleground, every wall, every shadow, every vantage point a tool. She had survived worse. She had trained for worse. But the operatives were relentless, and Wraith was watching. She realized then the brutal truth. Surviving this night would require more than skill. It would require outthinking the hunters, anticipating Wraith, and trusting instincts honed over a lifetime of shadowed missions. And somewhere deep inside, Elena Hart felt the surge of something she hadn't felt in years, pure, unyielding determination. The operatives were closing in. The compound was the last line of defense. And the hunt was far from over. The abandoned compound had become a maze of shadows, echoes, and tension. Elena crouched behind the rusted frame of a collapsed wall, eyes scanning every angle, every corner, every possible point of intrusion. The air was thick with dust and the metallic tang of adrenaline. Every second stretched, every heartbeat a countdown. Collins moved silently beside her, eyes narrowed, weapon raised. "They're regrouping," he whispered, "trying to flank us. We can't hold them forever." Elena nodded, muscles coiled like springs. The smoke from the earlier grenade still lingered, curling through broken windows and shattered doorways. Shadows moved within it, fast, precise, unrelenting. She exhaled slowly. Predict, anticipate, survive. Every operative advancing into the compound was skilled, trained, and lethal. but she had the advantage of preparation. Every wall, every window, every vantage point had been fortified, barricaded, or rigged to slow the enemy. "East side," she muttered. "They're trying the east side. Tripwire on the door, improvised spike trap, should slow them down." Collins ducked as the first operative emerged, stepping onto the rigged entry. The trap sprang perfectly, sending him sprawling with a loud crash. Elena rolled forward, striking with precision, incapacitating him before he could recover. The operatives adapted instantly, regrouping, moving in coordinated squads. Smoke curled along the ground, reducing visibility, forcing her to rely entirely on instinct and reflex. Every movement had to be calculated, every shot precise. There was no room for hesitation. And then she felt it, a presence cold, calculated, familiar. Wraith. He emerged from the shadows atop the ridge overlooking the compound. Calm, silent, his eyes locked on her. Elena's pulse quickened. This was no longer just a survival scenario. This was a reckoning. Wraith's voice cut through the chaos, low and controlled. Impressive, Elena, but predictable, always a little predictable. Her jaw tightened. She had trained under him, survived his drills, mastered the skills he taught, but this was different. Now he wasn't teaching. He was observing, evaluating, judging. "Stay sharp," Collins warned, scanning the perimeter. "They're coordinating again. We've got multiple points of attack." Elena's eyes flicked across the compound. Shadowed figures moved with mechanical precision, a silent army closing in. The traps she had set slowed them, but their numbers, skill, and coordination were overwhelming. Then Wraith moved. He descended from the ridge with the ease and grace of a predator, landing silently in the open compound. Elena froze for a split second, the ghost of her past standing in the middle of the battlefield. "Step aside," he said quietly, almost a statement, not a command. "This is between you and me." Her instincts screamed. She would not trust him, not now, not after everything. She kept her rifle raised, muscles tensed. "I'm not coming back," she said firmly, voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through her. Wraith tilted his head, eyes narrowing. "Then survive." The operatives advanced again, using the distraction to flank from multiple angles. Elena pivoted, firing with precision, rolling across cover, striking with lethal efficiency. Collins provided suppressive fire, covering her movements. But the numbers were overwhelming. Every operative she incapacitated seemed to be replaced by another, moving faster, adapting, relentless. Elena darted toward a stack of crates, pivoting midair to strike a charging operative with a bone-crushing elbow. Another lunged from behind, and she twisted, using his momentum against him, sending him crashing into a rusted wall. Through the chaos, Wraith remained calm, observing her movements with a predator's patience. He didn't intervene, not yet, but his presence alone was a threat, a constant reminder that she was still part of a world she thought she had left behind. Then a sudden flash. A grenade rolled into the center of the compound, smoke and sparks erupting. Operatives surged forward from the haze. Elena pivoted instinctively, ducking low, striking, rolling, disarming. Every movement was fluid, lethal, honed through years of clandestine training. Collins grunted, firing, moving to cover her as she advanced. Together, they became a deadly unit, instinct and strategy interwoven seamlessly. But the operatives were relentless. A dozen more appeared on the rooftops, silhouetted against the moonlight, rifles trained with deadly accuracy. Elena's mind raced. Every second was a calculation, every movement a potential death sentence. She pivoted, firing, ducking behind cover, striking with precision. Then Wraith moved closer. Calm, deliberate, his presence a constant pressure. Elena realized that she couldn't just fight the operatives. She had to contend with him, with the lessons he had drilled into her, the patterns he had taught her to follow, the instincts he had instilled. "Use what you've learned," he said softly, almost approvingly. But don't forget, predictable patterns are dangerous. Her mind flashed. She had been using instinct reflex, but now she needed to break pattern, improvise beyond her training, adapt faster than anyone could anticipate. A shadow moved in her periphery, an operative trying to flank her. She feigned movement left, then pivoted right, striking with precision and disarming him before he could react. Another operative lunged from the smoke. She rolled, flipped, and incapacitated him with a swift strike. The numbers were still overwhelming, but she had the advantage of improvisation, of unpredictability, and Wraith was watching, silent, judging. Collins shouted, ducking behind cover as another operative aimed for a clear shot. Elena pivoted, firing a suppressive round that forced the operative to retreat into cover. She moved again, using every shadow, every wall, every piece of debris to her advantage. Wraith stepped forward closer now, eyes locked on hers. "You've grown," he said quietly. "But growth isn't enough. They'll keep coming, always. You'll never be free if you don't understand that." Elena's chest tightened. She had always known the truth. Survival was temporary, freedom fleeting. But she had fought too hard, survived too much to surrender now. She pivoted, rolling behind cover as operatives surged forward, using smoke, shadows, and tactical maneuvers to overwhelm her position. Collins moved with precision, covering her flanks. Together they struck, incapacitated, and adapted, but the numbers were still a threat. Then a sudden realization hit her. Wraith wasn't here to kill her. Not yet. He was testing her, evaluating how she handled overwhelming force, how she adapted, how she survived under impossible odds. Her pulse surged. She understood now. To survive, she couldn't just fight the operatives. She had to anticipate Wraith, predict his observations, and move beyond what he expected. With a sudden burst of energy, she pivoted, striking two operatives simultaneously, rolling behind a wall and firing with precision at another group advancing from the east. Collins provided covering fire, their synergy seamless. The operatives faltered, surprised by her unpredictability, slowed by her improvisation. But more were coming, always more, relentless, coordinated, lethal. Wraith's voice echoed faintly. "Impressive, Elena, but not enough. You need to do more than survive. You need to think beyond me, beyond them, beyond the patterns." Elena's heart raced. She understood the challenge now. Survival wasn't just about reflex. It was about foresight, anticipation, breaking patterns, and exploiting weaknesses. The compound had become a chessboard, every shadow a potential move, every operative a piece to outmaneuver. She pivoted, struck, rolled, fired, fluid, lethal, unpredictable. The operatives faltered, giving her precious seconds to regroup, reposition, and strike again. And in that moment, Elena Hart realized something terrifying and exhilarating at once. The fight wasn't just for survival. It was for mastery, mastery of herself, her instincts, and the game that had been set before her since she was trained. The operatives were relentless. Wraith was watching, and the night stretched on with no promise of respite. But for the first time, Elena felt the rush of true control, the clarity of purpose, and the intoxicating certainty that she could not only survive, but turn the hunt into her advantage. And then, in the shadows of the compound, movement from the west side caught her eye, a figure she had not anticipated. Someone or something was coming. The shadows stretched like fingers across the broken compound, twisting and shifting with every flicker of moonlight. Elena crouched behind a crumbling wall, rifle at the ready, pulse hammering. She could hear the operatives regrouping, coordinating, relentless as ever, and Wraith's calm, calculating presence weighed like a storm overhead. Collins leaned beside her, sweat trickling down his face. "They're consolidating," he said quietly. "We can't hold them off much longer." Elena's eyes scanned the perimeter. Every approach was covered, every shadow scrutinized. But she knew she couldn't just hold them off. Not tonight. Not against these numbers. Not against the master who had trained her. Then we don't hold them off, she muttered under her breath, voice steady. We take the fight to them. Collins blinked, understanding the shift in strategy. Alina had been the hunter tonight as much as they were the prey. She wasn't just surviving, she was adapting, evolving, turning the battlefield into an extension of her instincts. From the west side of the compound, movement caught her eye. A lone operative, seemingly detached from the others, advanced cautiously, scanning for traps. Alina calculated the trajectory, the distance, the angle. With a swift, precise motion, she struck, incapacitating him silently before he could signal the others. Wraith's silhouette shifted along the ridge, observing, evaluating. His expression was unreadable, but Alina felt it. His anticipation, his judgment, his unrelenting presence. You've grown, he said quietly, his voice carrying across the compound. But growth alone isn't enough. You must think beyond what you've learned, beyond what you've trained for. Alina's mind raced. She had trained for combat, survival, improvisation, but Wraith had never prepared her for this level of unpredictability. This was more than skill. This was intuition, foresight, and willpower combined into something lethal and unyielding. She pivoted, rolling behind cover, taking down two operatives advancing through the smoke-filled east entrance. Collins covered her, firing precise shots, moving with practiced efficiency. The synergy between them was seamless, a blend of strategy and instinct that kept the operatives at bay, just barely. Then Wraith moved. Calmly, deliberately, he descended into the center of the compound, appearing almost like a phantom among the chaos. Alina froze for a fraction of a second, the weight of their shared history pressing down. I told you, he said softly, patterns are dangerous. Predictable movements lead to death. You must do more than survive. Her breath caught. Survival wasn't enough tonight. She had to master the fight, control it, bend it to her will. Alina pivoted, eyes narrowing. She could feel the rhythm of the operatives' coordination, the slight hesitation in their synchronized movements. She exploited it, rolling across cover, striking with precision, incapacitating two more operatives before they could respond. Collins moved to reinforce her flank, firing with controlled precision, buying her time. The remaining operatives adjusted, moving faster, flanking from multiple angles. But Alina had anticipated this. She had predicted their patterns, their timing, and now she would turn it against them. She activated the final trap, a series of rigged explosives and tripwires set along the north approach. The first operative stepped onto the line, triggering a controlled explosion that sent him tumbling into a pile of debris. Chaos erupted among the remaining operatives, momentarily breaking their coordination. Seizing the advantage, Alina moved like a shadow, striking with lethal efficiency, incapacitating one operative after another. Collins provided cover, and together they became a storm of calculated violence, unpredictable and devastating. Wraith's presence loomed closer. Alina could sense him, feel his assessment of her every move. She pivoted, rolling behind cover, then leapt onto a stack of crates, gaining higher ground. From this vantage point, she could see the entire compound, the remaining operatives, and the shifting shadows. Enough, Wraith said finally, stepping forward into the open. His voice was calm, but every inch of his body radiated lethal precision. You've proven skill, Alina, but do you understand? Survival is temporary, mastery is permanent. Her chest heaved. She knew what he meant. The fight wasn't just against the operatives, it was against herself, against the lessons he had drilled into her, against the fear and instinct that had governed her every movement for years. Alina raised her rifle, eyes locking on him. I've learned, she said firmly, but mastery isn't given, it's earned. Tonight I earn it. Wraith's eyes narrowed, a faint smile ghosting across his lips. Good, then show me. The remaining operatives surged forward one last time, coordinated, aggressive, relentless. Alina pivoted, rolling, striking, firing, every movement fluid, precise, lethal. Collins covered her relentlessly, their synergy perfect, adaptive, unstoppable. A shadow fell across her peripheral vision, Wraith, moving faster than she anticipated, intercepting one of the operatives attempting to flank her. His intervention was subtle, precise, not to dominate but to test, to observe, to elevate her response. Alina realized then, Wraith hadn't come to control her. He had come to push her, to force her beyond her limits. And she embraced it, every instinct, every skill, every ounce of willpower converging into perfect focus. The final operatives advanced, but the compound was no longer their advantage. Alina and Collins controlled the battlefield, exploiting every trap, every shadow, every structural weakness. One by one, the operatives fell, incapacitated or retreating, unable to predict the lethal improvisation that had become Alina Hart. Wraith's eyes followed her, calculating, approving. "You've survived," he said quietly, voice carrying across the wreckage. "Not just by skill, but by understanding. You've become unstoppable." Alina exhaled slowly, muscles tense, adrenaline surging. The threat had been neutralized, the operatives incapacitated or retreating, and Wraith remained, watching, silent, a reminder of the path she had walked and the skills she had mastered. Collins lowered his weapon, breathing heavily. "It's over for now," he said. Alina didn't respond immediately. She scanned the compound, every shadow, every potential threat, every vantage point. Survival was never guaranteed, mastery was never permanent, but for tonight she had earned both. Wraith stepped forward, closer now, calm and measured. "You've surpassed expectation," he said quietly. "But remember this, freedom comes at a price, and the hunters, they never stop." Alina's eyes locked on his, unwavering. "Then I'll keep moving, I'll keep fighting, and I'll survive." For a moment the world seemed to hold its breath, the compound silent except for the soft wind and distant echoes of retreating operatives. The night had tested her, pushed her, reshaped her, but she had emerged not just alive, but stronger, sharper, and ready for whatever came next. Collins moved to her side, nodding. "We need to leave, now." Alina glanced around, surveying the destruction, the chaos, the remnants of the battle. The compound had been their proving ground and she had mastered it. As they moved toward the Humvee, ready to escape the ruins, Alina allowed herself one glance back at Wraith. He stood silently among the shadows, a ghost of her past and a reminder of the world she had left behind. But tonight she had proven herself, not to him, not to the operatives, but to herself. The engines roared to life, tires grinding against the asphalt as they sped into the night. Shadows stretched and twisted behind them, but Alina didn't look back. She had survived the hunt, earned her freedom, and mastered the chaos. And somewhere deep inside she felt a fierce, unyielding certainty. The night was hers. The hunt was hers, and she would never run again. The darkness stretched ahead, full of uncertainty, danger, and relentless challenge. But Alina Hart had become unstoppable. And the world would never be the same.